Very good afternoon to all. Today in this session, we are going to discuss about fiscal policy, which is a very important policy for any economy to control the fluctuations in the economy and to achieve the target of economic growth of any country. Now, what does this fiscal policy mean? The word fisc means state treasury, and fiscal policy means the policy of using state treasury or the government finance to achieve certain macroeconomic objectives or goals. Fiscal policy has been variously defined by the economist. Like Arthur Smithis defined fiscal policy as a policy under which government uses its expenditure and revenue programs to produce desirable effects and avoid undesirable effects on the national income, production and employment. In general, if we say, then fiscal policy is the government policy of making discretionary changes in the pattern and level of its expenditure, taxation and borrowings in order to achieve certain economic goals such as economic growth, employment, inequality of income removal or bringing the equality of income and stabilization of the income of the economy on a growth path. So, fiscal policy refers to the use of government spending and taxation policy to influence economic conditions, specifically the macroeconomic conditions. Within fiscal policies, aggregate demand for goods and services, employment, inflation and economic growth are altered with the Government of India through the Ministry of Finance controls the fiscal policies in India. Now, if we talk about the scope of fiscal policy, then the scope of fiscal policy comprises the fiscal instruments and the target variables of the government policy. Like fiscal instruments are the variables that government can use and maneuver at its own discretion to achieve certain economic goals. Now, fiscal instruments includes like taxation, which include direct and indirect tax, government expenditure, transfer payments like grants, subsidies and public investment. The target variables are the macroeconomic variables including like disposable income, aggregate consumption, expenditure, savings and investment, imports and exports and the level and structure of prices. So, the fiscal policy instruments and targets we will discuss in this session today. Now, objectives, if we talk about what are the main objectives of the fiscal policy of any country. First objective is the development by effective mobilization of resource. So, what do we mean by this? Like government policy or the fiscal policy by its instruments, maybe the taxation, government expenditure, borrowing, budget, they mobilize the resource in the economy, and through mobilization of these resources, government try to achieve their targets in the economy. Like suppose if I give you example of 2021 and 21-22, the IMF projection was that Indian economic growth rate will be of 9%. Even the National Statistical Organization also targeted, growth rate of 9% of Indian economy. Now, how to achieve this growth rate of 9% is only through mobilization of resources by using the different instruments of fiscal policy. So, therefore, we can say that first objective is to achieve that economic growth, economic development by mobilization of the resources in the country. The another objective is reduction in inequalities of income and wealth, because government has to take care of the welfare of the economy, welfare of the people living in the economy, and therefore they need to reduce the inequality of income. And one of the example of Indian economy is like government uses the instrument of taxation to reduce inequality of income along with other instruments of the fiscal policy. Like for example, in India we have progressive tax system and we take more tax from the rich or those whose income level is very high, and that income is used for the welfare of the poor, to reduce the inequality of income. And by doing so, that also lead to increase in the growth rate of the economy, because the marginal propensity to consume of the poor, or those who are below the poverty line, or those who are belonging to the middle class, lower middle class family, is very high. And if MPC is high, then increase in the national income will be high, because multiplier will be more. So this, through this target, or through this objective, also government try to achieve the development target also, because all these goals and targets are interrelated to each other. Another objective of fiscal policy is price stability, or to control inflation or deflation in the economy, because deflation is also not good for the economy, because that will hamper the economic growth. So if there is inflation in the economy, very high rate of inflation, that affects negatively the welfare of the people living in the economy. So price stability becomes one of the main objective of fiscal policy. And how do they control price, or they bring price stability? But stability does not mean here that price will remain fixed, but there will be gradual increase in the price, or very slow rate price increases, okay, because that is good for the economy, because mild rate of inflation is always accepted and acceptable by the people and by the investor. So price stability is very important. Suppose if inflation is very high in the economy, prices are increasing at a very fast rate, then government will use contractionary fiscal policy to control inflation. They need to reduce the money supply in the economy, so that they can control the demand, and by controlling demand they can control inflation in the economy. And for that purpose, government need to reduce the government expenditure. They also need to reduce the indirect tax rate, and they may increase the direct tax rate, because increase in the direct tax rate will lead to decrease in the disposable income. And if disposable income goes down, then the demand for the goods in the economy will go down. So like suppose for example, if a person is earning 1 lakh rupees and government says that he or she has to pay 10% tax, so that means after deducting tax, disposable income will be 90,000. And if the tax rate increases, direct tax rate increases to 15%, then disposable income will be 85,000. So consumer can consume only 85,000, or he can spend only 85,000 now, so that will lead to decrease in the demand. And this type of steps taken by the government is known as like contractionary policy. When there is inflation, so they use contractionary policy to control inflation. Then another objective is employment generation, because unemployment is taken as very serious issue, very serious problem for any economy. And to generate employment is another objective of fiscal policy. So government, by increasing government expenditure in different areas, maybe like infrastructure or other industries, they generate employment. And not only this direct generation of employment, but also government through their policy, they also motivate private investments, and they motivate people to make more investment, and that will also help in generation of employment. And suppose if we talk about Indian economy, then there are different government policies where people they motivate people for self-employment, they motivate people for increasing investment. Okay, they give different tax exemptions, they give credit facilities, they give different motivation to the investors, so that they can start their business, and that will help in generation of employment of the general public. Then another objective is reducing the deficit in the balance of payment. So balance of payment again is a deficit in the balance of payment also is a problem for any economy. And specifically for developing economy or underdeveloped economy, the balance of payment is deficit in nature. Why? Because our imports are more, our exports are less, and therefore we have to make more payment, and in return our receipts are less because our exports are less. If we talk about Indian economy, then that our most of the imports are of capital goods, and our exports are related to agricultural products. So therefore, our imports are costlier than our exports, and therefore our balance of payment is in deficit. So government has adopted various policies, various measures to control the deficit in the balance of payment, like government promote export producing industries so that they can produce more goods, they can export more goods, so we can generate income. Government is also promoting those industries where people are producing import substitute products. So import substitution is again another measure to control the deficit in the balance of payment. So fiscal policy objective is to reduce the deficit amount so that we can earn more foreign reserves and we can have proper balance of payment of our country. Another objective is increasing national income. That is the main objective of any policy, because all other objectives are related to this and dependent upon this. So increasing national income means increasing investment, so that income will increase in the marginal propensity to consume, that will increase the multiplier, and that will also lead to increase in the national income or generation of employment. If more employment is generated, then that will also lead to increase in the national income. So that is the another objective. Next is the development of infrastructure, because infrastructure is the base for the growth of any economy. Better the infrastructure, more investment in the infrastructure will lead to more investment from the private sector. So therefore, development of infrastructure is another objective of fiscal policy, and that in all the budgets, if we see from last 4 years, 5 years, you will see that heavy investment is done on infrastructure and more fund is allocated for infrastructure development. Because if any area, suppose if we see that any remote area in India, and if government invests there in infrastructure, and if all infrastructure like all transportation facilities, roadways, railways or airports are built there, then automatically private investors will go there and they will invest money and they can start industries there. And if industries are started there, then obviously that area will develop, because people will go there in search of job and automatically the development will take place. So these are the main objectives of fiscal policy of any country, and particularly in developing country like India. Now, what are the components of fiscal policy? The first component is the government receipts. Now, it refers to the government income in the form of taxes, interest and earnings on investment, because there are various public sector undertakings which earn profit on their investment, and other receipts for services rendered are altogether known as government receipts. So total revenue generated by the government through these various sources, that may be taxation, maybe interest income or investment, or against the services rendered by the government. So all this comes under government receipts. Then government expenditure. It refers to the purchase of goods and services which include public consumption, public investment, transfer payments like pensions or social benefits and capital transfers. Then there is another component known as public debt. It accounts for flows for those transactions where government is merely acting as a banker. And these funds do not belong to the government, but rather have to be paid back to their rightful owners. For example, like small savings, provident fund, reserve fund, etc. So public debt here means that borrowing of the government, and that borrowing may be internal borrowing or may be the external borrowing. Internal borrowing means the borrowing from the people of the country itself by issuing like government bonds or provident fund or any reserve funds by the government. And external borrowing means like taking loan from the other countries. So that all component, if we combine, that comes under the public debts. Now, what are the different types of receipts of the government? Revenue receipts, capital receipts. Now, revenue receipts means that receipts that neither create liability or not reduces the assets of the government. Like it includes like taxes, revenue through interest and dividend on government investment, and other receipts for services rendered by the government, because that these type of revenue does not create any liability for the government. Capital receipts, now these are the receipts that create liability or reduces assets and are treated as debt receipts, as the government has to repay this money and with its interest in some cases. So it includes like all type of borrowings, loans, etc. Now if we talk about expenditure, government expenditure, then again there are two types of expenditure. Okay, first is revenue expenditure. So they are the short term expenses. It includes like operational cost of the government and maintenance cost. It can be considered to be like recurring expenditure, okay, like salaries and employee wages, utilities, property taxes on government owned properties, etc. Then capital expenditure, it constitutes of investments made by the government in the capital to maintain or to expand its business and generate additional revenue, because capital expenditure is always the objective is to generate revenue. So anything invested or spent to generate income is known as capital expenditure. So capital expenditures are often used for buying fixed assets like purchase of machineries or purchase of land, building, purchase for businesses or spending on infrastructure, etc. So that all consist of the capital expenditure. Now if we see this year's budget, government budget expenditure in various sectors, then you can see here like there are various sectors, okay, where government has devoted different percentage of their expenditure. So in this like service sector is there, then infrastructure is there, subsidies are there. So there are different activities or different areas where money will go and where government will spend money. So this you can see through this diagram. Now if we talk about types of fiscal policy, now there are mainly three types. One is neutral. So this type of policy is usually undertaken when an economy is in equilibrium. Now in this instance, government spending is fully funded by the tax revenue, which has a neutral effect on the economy. Now neutral effect means that there is no surplus, no deficit, and total revenue is equal to total expenditure. So government spend whatever is earned. So there is no surplus, no deficit, and therefore it is known as the neutral impact of this fiscal policy. Another is expansionary policy. So this type of policy is usually undertaken during recession to increase the level of economic activity. And in this instance, the government spends more money than it collects in the taxes. Why? Because in the time of recession, the demand is less. People are not having more profit, they are not having money, their purchasing power is less. So therefore, at the time of recession, government adopts expansionary policy, means they increases public expenditure, okay, and by increasing public expenditure, they increase money supply in the economy. And if money supply increases, then purchasing power of people will increase. They can spend more, they can demand more, and if expenditure increases, if the demand increases, then obviously the businessman will earn more profit because there will be demand for their products. And if their profit increases, their investment increases. If investment increases, then obviously that will generate employment. It will again lead to increase in income, and this cycle continues, and that will lead to increase in the economic growth rate of the economy, and economy can come out from the recession. So therefore, at the time of recession specifically, government adopts expansionary fiscal policy, or even when the economy is a developing economy or underdeveloped economy, and the objective is to increase the growth rate of the economy, to increase the national income of the country, then every time government has the expansionary policy. You can see the example of Indian economy, because we are a developing economy and the main target of our government is to increase the growth rate of the economy, to generate employment, to increase national income. So therefore, we always have a deficit, budget, and we have expansionary fiscal policy, because they spend more, government expenditure is more, and more infrastructure development projects are there, so that will lead to increase in the growth rate of the economy. Okay, then next is contractionary fiscal policy. So this type of policy is undertaken to pay down government debt and to cap inflation, to control inflation. So in this case, government spending is lower than the tax rate, because contractionary fiscal policy is normally used when the inflation rate is very high. Because when inflation rate is high, then the objective is to control the demand, and if demand goes down, then obviously that prices will go down. And to reduce demand, government has to reduce the money supply from the economy, and therefore to decrease money supply, they take more money as an income, means they take more revenue in terms of taxation or in terms of other services rendered by the government, and they spend less so that they can extract money from the circulation, and that type of policy is known as contractionary fiscal policy. Okay, now how fiscal policy relates to the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. Now aggregate demand consists of consumption, investment, government expenditure and exports. So aggregate demand curve will shift as a result of changes in any of these components. So expansionary fiscal policy involves increase in government expenditure, a reduction in tax, or a combination of these two. So when there is expansionary fiscal policy, then that will lead to the shift in the aggregate demand curve, that you can see here, that expansionary fiscal policy in the first diagram, then aggregate demand curve will shift outward from AD1 to AD2 if there is expansionary fiscal policy, and that will lead to increase in the GDP of the country. That may also lead to increase in the prices of the country of the product also, because when these two aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve will intersect, then that will increase in the GDP as well as the increase in the prices also. But at the time of contractionary, like if government decreases the expenditure, then part 2 of this diagram you can see that aggregate demand curve will shift leftward, and that will lead to reduction in the growth rate of the economy, and that will also help in controlling the prices of the economy. So if there is a change in the government expenditure, then there will be changes in the economy through aggregate demand curve and aggregate supply curve. Now expansionary fiscal policy, that is used when the objective is of the growth rate, or the objective is to control the recession situation in the economy. And contractionary policy is used when prices are increasing and government objective is to control inflation. So fiscal policy is one of the important tool that an economy uses to maintain stability. Okay, but fiscal policy alone is not enough. Equally effective monetary policy has to be there in place to get the maximum out of the economy. So proper administration along with the right minds at the authority, economy of any country can prosper. Okay, so thank you so much, and we will meet again with another topic, and we will discuss again. Thank you.